Okay, we keep reading, my big fat zombie goldfish. We're up to chapter 10, Mission Unflushable. Then I heard a splash outside. I looked up and saw the open bathroom window. I climbed up on the toilet and looked out. There was Frankie rolling his plastic bag out of the puddle on the garage roof. Then he rolled himself along the gutter, dropped down onto the water butt, and with a final dismount flumped onto the grass. I punched the air. He was safe! But I was dead meat when Mark found out the fish was gone. Maybe I could convince Mark that I'd flushed Frankie. Nah, he'd never buy it, and he'd kill me anyway just because he could. I'd be better off escaping with Frankie. That's how he got out. Look at that. Okay, I was just about to climb out the window and follow him when I heard the next noise. It sounded like someone falling down the back steps, bouncing off a little trampoline and crashing into a sandbox. That couldn't be Frankie making that noise, surely. But if it wasn't Frankie, then who was it? I ran downstairs and out the door. Mark was lying face down in the sandbox, groaning. The little trampoline had been put at the bottom of the steps, which was smeared with white chocolate. My first thought was, I'm really good at guessing stuff just from the sounds. My second thought was, white chocolate? It's got to be Sammy. Again, again! I heard the giggling voice from behind me. Sammy was carrying a bowl of chocolate and licking her fingers. She started bouncing on the trampoline. You are funny, she said to Mark. Again, please, again. Mark just groaned. Pradeep came running across the garden towards us. He stopped when he saw Sammy. Sammy, you're meant to be inside with Mum. Then he looked at the steps and back at her hands. Sammy, did you? Frankie must have hypnotised her to do it, I said. Sammy smiled. Her hands were still covered in chocolate, but her expression was normal. She didn't look hypnotised anymore. I waved my hand in front of her face to check. Hi, Tom, she said, and waved back at me. She definitely didn't have the goldfish stare anymore, but she also didn't have the goldfish. Where's Fishy? I asked her, in an I'm trying not to panic, but really starting to panic kind of way. Swishy little fishy, she said, still bouncing. Fishy rolled away. We looked around for Frankie. Under the trampoline, around the bike shed, under the shrubs, no good. Mark's groans started to become words. Things like stupid morons and they'll be sorry and I could smell chocolate. He was starting to move too. Then Sammy squealed again, Swishy little fishy, and pointed to the top of the climbing frame slide. There was Frankie. He was rolling his plastic bag onto Mark's skateboard. The skateboard was pointed down the slide, straight at the sandbox and straight at Mark's head. Oh no. Chapter 11, Revenge of the Zombie Goldfish. Frankie's eyes were bright glow-in-the-dark green and his tail was swishing hard back and forth in the water. The goldfish was set on revenge. I looked at Mark lying at the bottom of the slide. My fists clenched at the thought of him trying to hurt Frankie. But could I really stand by and let Frankie hurt him? Your goldfish is trying to kill your brother, Pradeep shouted. Not if I can help it, I said, and then I did the second most dangerous thing I've done in my life. I tried to stop Frankie. Frankie swished his tail hard and the skateboard started to roll down the slide, picking up speed as it went. Fishy! Whee! Sammy yelled. I raced to the bottom of the slide and threw myself between Mark and the skateboard. I could see Frankie's eyes as he rode the skateboard down towards me. They changed to a soft green and he swished his tail back and forth wildly. He wanted me to get out of the way. I shook my head and held my ground. I closed my eyes, waiting for the skateboard to hit me. Concussion number 2, here I come. Then I heard the skateboard jump off the side of the slide. I looked up to see it flip mid-air like when the boarders at the park do half pipes and twists. Except this was a goldfish in a plastic bag, not a skateboarding kid. And the thing about goldfish in bags is that when the board goes upside down, they have no way to hang on. The skateboard flew over me and Mark, and then Frankie started to fall. He must have been 10 feet in the air. I rolled over onto my back and held out my hands to catch him. The bag hit my hands, but I couldn't hold it. It splattered on my chest and the bag burst open. Water sprayed everywhere. And Frankie was left flip-flopping around on my t-shirt. "No!" I shouted. "Frankie!" I jumped up, cupping in my hands. "I've got you, Frankie," I said as I turned to Pradeep. "Get some water, quick!" Frankie's goldfish mouth was opening and closing as if he was gasping for breath. His eyes were still the soft green colour. He flicked his tail and wriggled, then he stopped moving completely. "Hang on, Frankie!" I screamed. Pradeep ran over to the slide with a watering can full of rainwater that he had grabbed from the next to the shed. I dropped Frankie into it. Pradeep, Sammy and me all sat around the watering can and stared at Frankie unmoving in the water. "You turned the skateboard on purpose, didn't you? You didn't want to hurt me," I said. Mark was still lying in the sandbox, groaning. "The goldfish, my skateboard. Why am I wet?" Frankie floated belly up in the watering can. He didn't move a fin. "Swishy little fishy," Sammy said, sniffling. Her bottom lip started to wobble again. Not in a Richter scale level tantrum kind of way, but in a sadder than a little kid ought ever to feel kind of a way. "He's gone," I said. The millipedes that were swimming in my stomach curled up into a big, heavy millipede lump. "I'm sorry," said Pradeep. "Not swishy," whispered Sammy. A tear rolled down her cheek and dripped off her snotty nose and into the watering can. And that's when it happened. Frankie started to swish his tail, just a little at first. Then his gills started flapping and his mouth opened and closed, and then he flipped over and started swimming in circles around and around. "Fishy!" said Sammy, and hugged the watering can. "Frankie, you're back," I said, hardly able to believe that he was swimming around again. "Who's a good zombie fish?" I said, and stroked him gently behind the gills. "Hey, you know what we just discovered?" Pradeep said. "I know," I said, "that the one thing more powerful than a battery for bringing a fish back from the life is," Pradeep said with me at the same time, "toddler snot." Chapter 12, Return of the Mummy. "Beep beep," we heard Mum's car pull into the drive. "Oh no," I said. Pradeep and I quickly ran over to Mark and helped him sit up. He was still holding onto his head where he'd banged it when he fell into the sandbox. Sammy just sat there still hugging the watering can. Mum came straight round the back of the house and ran over to us. She could tell there was something wrong. Mums have this thing where they know stuff that should be impossible. It should be impossible to know. Like that you didn't eat your carrot sticks at lunch, or that it was you who put the ham slice in the CD player to see what the ham sounded like, or that your undead zombie goldfish hypnotised your neighbour's daughter and then tried to kill your evil scientist big brother but at the last minute changed its mind to save your life. You know, that kind of thing. I took one look at Mum and was sure she could figure it out. It was so obvious what had happened, but the first thing she said was, "What on earth happened here?" "We were just playing," Pradeep said right away. The game got a little messy, and wet, and he was talking really fast and looking really guilty. Mum was definitely going to get that something was up. "Fishy is swishy," Sammy shouted. "Yay!" "Oh, that's sweet. You let Sammy play with your fish, Mark," Mum said. "But why do you have the fish outside in a watering can?" "It needed some fresh air," I said, which Mum is always telling us that we need, so it must be true for fish too. Although usually when Mum tells us to go outside, it's because she wants to talk to Dad alone or shout at Aunt Sarah on the phone. "Okay," Mum's voice said in a normal kind of way, but her face was really saying, "What are they up to?" "Mark, are you all right?" she added. Mark rubbed his head. He looked over at me and Pradeep and then at Sammy and the watering can. "The goldfish tried to kill me," he said. "I tripped and fell in the sandbox and then it aimed the skateboard at me." Mum went over to Mark and felt his head for bumps. She's an expert bump finder after all. After all these years. I bet she could be a doctor in bumps and stuff. "You banged your head pretty hard, Mark." She held her fingers in front of Mark. "How many am I holding up?" "It tried to kill me," Mark mumbled. Mum looked over at me and Pradeep. What happened? Then I heard myself say the most untrue thing ever. Mark was being really nice, playing with Sammy in the sandbox and on the trampoline. Bouncy, bouncy, crash, said Sammy, now jumping on the trampoline with the watering can. I leaned over and gently took the can from her. Then he did a trick bounce that made Sammy laugh, Pradeep said, which isn't really a lie, because he did do that even though he didn't mean to do it. He must have hit his head when he fell, I said. Oh, poor you, Mum said to Mark as she rubbed his head. And what's this about the goldfish? She helped him stand up and he walked over to where I was sitting with a watering can. He stared at Frankie. The goldfish started thrashing about in the water like mad again, and his eyes went bright green. Mum, look at the goldfish, Mark said, pointing wildly at the watering can. It's gone nuts. It really tried to kill me. Pradeep and I shot each other a look. We couldn't say anything out loud, but our faces said that we needed a new colour jelly bean code, because this was way beyond code red. Mum couldn't look now. She'd see Frankie being all zombie fish. Then she would let Mark flush him for sure, or she'd send him off to some government place where they kept pets that have gone all supernatural and dangerous. All right, she said, I'll look at the goldfish. She marched over towards us. We were doomed.